Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions will come to order. The title of our hearing this morning is Standing Up Against Corporate Greed, How Unions Are Improving the Lives of Working Families. And we're delighted that Shawn Fain, the president of the United Auto Workers, Sean O'Brien, president of the Teamsters, and Sara Nelson, the president of the Flight Attendants Union, are here with us today, and I look forward to their testimony. Our ranking member Cassidy has invited Diana Furcott-Roth with the Heritage Foundation and Sean Higgins with the Competitive Enterprise Institute, and we welcome them as well. Issue we're talking about today is really not complicated, and that is tens of millions of Americans are struggling to put food on the table, pay their rent, get by, while the wealthiest people in this country are doing better than they've ever done in the history of America. So what I hope every member is interested in discussing is, how do we change that? How do we create an economy that works for all of us, all of our people, and not just the few? And when we talk about the state of our economy and the working class in America, there is a lot to be concerned about. And one of the issues, and we don't talk about it enough, is that over the last 50 years, despite huge increases in technology and worker productivity, the average American worker is making about $50 a week less than he or she did 50 years ago. How did that happen? And I can remember growing up in a working class family in a working class neighborhood. Back then, it was a few years ago. Most families had one person working, mostly men. How does that happen? One worked, and today, almost without exception, you need two breadwinners to support the family. How does that happen despite all of the new technology and increase in worker productivity? And some of the realities of today is that right now, we have more income and wealth inequality than any time since the Gilded Age. Today in America, 3 people, we got to deal with this from a moral and economic perspective. 3 people own more wealth than the bottom half of American society, 165 million Americans. Today, while the people on top are doing phenomenally well, 60% of our people are living paycheck to paycheck. Today, while millions of ordinary people are struggling to pay the rent, pay for childcare, and put food on the table, the CEOs, major corporations, are now making 350 times as much as their average workers. According to the Rand Corporation, not exactly a socialist enterprise, over the last 50 years, there has been a massive redistribution of wealth. Since 1975, over $50 trillion in wealth has gone from the bottom 90% to the top 1%. And it's not just income and wealth inequality that we got to worry about. We're seeing more and more concentration of ownership in every sector of our economy. Fewer and fewer large corporations control what is being produced and distributed. Meanwhile, while that is going on, and that should be of major concern to every American, certainly every member of Congress, there is some very good news out there, and that is what we're going to be discussing today. And that is that all over this country, we are seeing workers standing up and fighting back against the unprecedented level of corporate greed taking place. This year alone, over 450,000 workers in America have gone on strike for better wages, better benefits, and better working conditions. And that is up 900% compared to just 2 years ago. Last year, union membership in America increased by 273,000 to a total of 14.3 million workers. Last year, employees in nearly 2,600 work sites in America filed petitions with the NLRB to form a union, up more than 50% from 2 years ago. According to the latest Gallup poll, 67% of the American people support labor unions. In other words, in America today, More workers want to join unions, more workers are joining unions, and more workers are going out on strike to improve their working conditions than we have seen in a very long time. And many of those unions, I'm going to hear about that today, are winning very strong contracts for their workers. And what we are seeing in these historic union victories are not only improving the lives of union members, but that is beginning to spill over into the lives of non-union workers in America as well. And we're going to be discussing this today, but just magically, don't know how it happened. We're seeing Honda just announced that it would be increasing the wages of their non-union workers in America by 11%. Toyota, 9 to 10%. Hyundai also announced a major increase, just by accident, no doubt. Had nothing to do with what the UAW recently accomplished. After the Teamsters won a strong contract to increase wages and benefits for their workers at UPS, Amazon increased wages for its non-union warehouse and delivery drivers as well. And it's not just blue-collar workers. We're seeing white-collar workers organize as well. In my state and all over the country, you're seeing residents in hospitals, doctors, MDs, organizing. You're seeing nurses organizing. You're seeing young people on college campuses, graduate students who really have been exploited for years, organizing in large numbers. Obviously, we're seeing actors organizing as well. So that is the good news. The bad news is that for far too long, many corporations are doing everything that they can to intimidate, coerce, threaten, and prevent workers from exercising their constitutional right to form a union and negotiate a fair contract, and we all know why that is. Because when workers are in a union, they get substantially better wages, working conditions, pensions, and other benefits. And that is why it is absolutely essential that we pass legislation like the PRO Act to make it easier for workers to organize. So with that, let me give the mic over to Senator Cassidy. Senator Cassidy.
Thank you, Chair Sanders. And Chair Sanders has acknowledged the progress that has been made by organized labor, which creates kind of, in my mind, a little bit of a puzzlement as to why we're having the hearing. We're not conducting oversight, and there doesn't seem to be a legislative purpose. The title of this hearing suggests that unions are functioning well, and it appears that they are, and that means that partisan legislation like the PRO Act is not necessary. Unions have a good message, apparently, about their ability to negotiate contracts on behalf of their members. If that's true, then they don't need the PRO Act to eliminate secret ballot union elections, which could expose workers to retaliation and intimidation. Unions shouldn't need the PRO Act to open workers to forced or coerced unionization by banning right-to-work laws in states like Louisiana, my state, that protect workers' freedom to choose whether to join a union or not. And they should not need, unions should not need the PRO Act or the Biden administration to impose radical joint employer rules to make it easier to unionize the 8 million franchise workers while undermining the business model of the establishments which employ them. If unions can convince workers that it is their best interest to join, then there shouldn't be changes to the independent contractor definition. This policy included in the PRO Act would take away the ability of 27 million workers to choose how to earn a living. Why? Well, effectively to make them susceptible to forced or coerced unionization. Now, I support a worker's ability to unionize. The right of workers to organize and be represented by a union is protected under the National Labor Relations Act. But if the benefits of joining a union are so good, and I'm sure that's the testimony we'll hear today, then there's no reason unions should have to coerce or strong-arm people to join. And they certainly don't need government to help them coerce and strong-arm. I'll remind my colleagues that this committee already voted on the PRO Act, with all Republicans opposing. There's no sign that the majority leader will bring it to the Senate floor, and it doesn't even have unanimous support from Democrats. But regardless, this committee has already devoted a markup to progressive legislation on unionizing and bargaining. So what is the purpose of today's hearing other than holding, I hate to say it, a taxpayer-funded pep rally for big labor unions? We have public health programs that expired September 30th, and we haven't had a hearing for the last 2 weeks. There are serious unmet responsibilities of this committee, but This issue takes precedent and is most deserving of our time. If we wish to celebrate those achievements that unions have recently achieved, that's the chair's prerogative. But we should point out that it's been 54 days since this committee has held a markup or hearing to consider actual legislation. Hopefully we can get back on track and use the limited time we have this year to get the rest of our reauthorizations over the finish line. With that, I yield.
Thank you, Senator Cassidy. Now we'll hear from our witnesses. Our first witness is Shawn Fain, the International President of the United Automobile Workers. Mr. Fain is a 29-year member of the UAW and got his start with the union as an electrician at Chrysler Kokomo Casting Plant. He served his local union at every level and was elected UAW president this year in the first ever direct election for the union's executive board. Mr. Fain, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Chairman Sanders. Good morning, and good morning, Dr. Cassidy and members of the committee. I'm honored to join this hearing as the first directly elected international president of the UAW, representing over 400,000 active members and 600,000 retired members across a wide range of sectors, from auto manufacturing to higher education. My roots in the auto industry run very deep, back to the first early days of the UAW, when my grandparents, one of my grandfathers was hired in at Chrysler in 1937, the year the UAW organized Chrysler. That job was life-changing for my grandparents, all four of them. Their generation came out of a Great Depression. All four of my grandparents migrated from the South in extreme poverty conditions. One of my grandparents was, her and her siblings were left in an orphanage because their parents couldn't afford to raise them. When they moved north and were able to get good paying union jobs, it changed their lives. It's the reason I'm sitting here today. That changed the entire trajectory for my family. And I shared that same pride when I was hired in 29 years ago. But throughout my 29 years as a UAW member, I've seen drastic changes. I've witnessed our working standards and conditions eroded at the hand of bad trade agreements designed to drive a race to the bottom. Many of the decisions were being made under the guise of helping the companies be more competitive, which competition, in my word, is code for corporate greed and a race to the bottom, because that's what it drives. Find the lowest paying person and compare yourself to that. That's not something we should aspire to be as a nation. Workers got caught on the losing end of a one-sided class war. This led to the big three closing or spinning off 65 plants in the last 20 years. In 2009, our members were unfairly villainized for everything that ailed the big three. Our members, both active and retired, made massive sacrifices, such as the suspension of cost of living, job security language provisions, just to name a few. And all those sacrifices bore by our members were made to help the big three stay afloat and remain competitive. And all that did was feed corporate greed and continued race to the bottom. Despite that, and despite the plant closures that tore apart communities, and how our members' lives were turned upside down, our members have always delivered. With recent success in the big three, our union just showed the world what's possible when workers unite to fight for more, to fight against corporate greed. Workers can win. Only a small percentage of working class Americans have the protection afforded by collective bargaining. Rather, the mass majority are treated like second-class citizens, employed at the will of employers. We want better for America, and you should want better for Americans. In the past 6 months, we've begun to turn the tide in this class war for the American worker. On September 14th, UAW launched our stand-up strike. It was a new strategy to take on corporate greed at Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, which is Chrysler's parent company. It allowed us to integrate our members into a national campaign where worker strikes strategically grew and escalated over time, giving our union bargaining teams maximum power to negotiate a record contract. For the first time in our history, we struck at all three companies, and in less than 7 weeks, we won justice for our members and other workers. We want things our industry hasn't seen in over 15 years, victories that will instantly change people's lives overnight, getting back to setting the standard, giving people purchasing power to move the economy. Never in our history have we negotiated the reopening of a plant. We won victories that will instantly overnight change the life, and Belvidere, Illinois was written off for dead, as many people know. We not only got work back for that plant, but also a new battery plant. Both of these plants are going to add thousands of jobs to the Belvidere, Illinois community. That's what a union can achieve through collective bargaining. There's far too much to in our agreement to detail in a short testimony, but, four of the major areas, we raised wages dramatically for over 100,000 workers. We took a major step toward ensuring a just transition in electric vehicles. We improved retirement security for hundreds of thousands of retirees. And lastly, we secured jobs. Job security was a major part of this bargaining for current employees and future members. And we bargained for language that allows us to strike these companies if they don't honor their commitments, which has been a huge issue in the past. Looking at the success of our contract, we're seeing that spill over into the non-union industry. After we announced our tentative agreements at the Big Three, Toyota made an unprecedented move and reduced their progression to full pay to 4 years from 8 years. They gave their employees a 9% pay increase. Honda raised wages 11%. And just yesterday, Hyundai announced that they're going to follow our pattern and raise wages by 25% for their employees through the year 2028. We call that the UAW bump, and that stands for You Are Welcome. And we're very proud of that. And when these workers decide to organize and join the UAW, they're going to realize the full benefit of union membership and get what they're fully due. We know, the fears being put out there now. Non-union companies are doing this because they're scared. They're scared that their workers see a better life. And the company's trying to head that off. They've used fear, uncertainty, and division to try to break the unions. And I promise you here, those days are over. The American public overwhelmingly supported what we've done. 75% of Americans said they supported our initiatives. The American public is fed up with an economy that works for the benefit of the billionaire class at the expense of the working class. The working class in this country is fed up and will not fall for a union-busting playbook threatening to close plants, firing union activists, pitting workers against each other. We're going to organize like hell to help thousands of workers in this country, primarily in the South, to win their union and raise the living standards for the entire working class. We have no interest in being a private welfare state. The working class needs this committee and the entire Congress to step up. You all have an essential role to play, not only supporting our fights and other fights like ours, but to finish the job for economic and social justice for the entire working class. We want the working class to organize, to bring dignity to their work, and enjoy the fruits of unionism and have a voice on the job. So for that, we need to muscle the federal government, not just as allies cheering from the sidelines. We need pro-worker Congress, guided by a vision of liberty and justice for all. Elected leaders that understand that economic justice is a national security risk for all of those who don't have it. It's a fight worth fighting for. We must bring that fight into the workplace, as well as the streets, but also in the halls of power in the chambers of the U.S. Senate. The UAW won wage increases from 33 to 250% over the life of this 4.5-year agreement for our members.
Mr. Fain, let me ask you to finish up.
Okay, thank you. We won for the first time in 15 years meaningful gains. And one thing I leave you with, there are three crises that we need to deal with. Income inequality, a transition to a green economy. We have to have an economy and environment we can live in, sustainable, and retirement insecurity. They're all linked, and they are the fight for our future. What kind of economy do we want to live in? What kind of planet do we want to live on? And what kinds of lives are we going to lead? Walter Reuther, the great leader of the UAW in the 20th century, spoke of our union as the American vanguard. As he said, we don't mind leading. We don't mind being the first to take action. We don't mind striking for social and economic justice. It is a duty and the privilege of the UAW to lead, but we need reinforcements. If this committee wishes to live up to its name, the HELP Committee, it's time to help the cause of economic and social justice in this country by bringing victories to the auto workers just realized to the entire working class, especially in public education. It's a group we haven't talked much about, but we need to look out for all of them. Public education has been villainized, and it's time to put the working class first. So thank you for having me today and being able to testify on behalf of the UAW members.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Fain. Our next witness is Shawn O'Brien, the General President of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. Mr. O'Brien is a fourth-generation Teamster and got his start with Teamsters Local 25 in Charlestown, Massachusetts, as a heavy equipment driver at the age of 18. Mr. O'Brien, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you very much, Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Dr. Cassidy, committee members. Thank you for inviting me to testify today about how unions are improving the lives of American working families. I'm Shawn O'Brien, General President, International Brotherhood of Teamsters. Let me start with a simple fact. Workers who belong to a union earn better wages and benefits than workers who aren't union members. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average union worker makes 18% more than their non-union counterparts. Early this year, the Teamsters negotiated the largest private sector collective bargaining agreement in North America at UPS, United Parcel Service. More than 340,000 UPS Teamsters showed the world the positive difference belonging to a union makes for working people. The Teamsters national contract with UPS secured more for our members than any other single agreement in the 120-year history of our great union. This victory included historic wage increases for all full and part-time workers, no forced overtime, air conditioning in new package cars, heat shields, and ventilation ducts in existing vehicles, no more two-tier wage systems, and equal footing for all workers. Raises for part-time workers in our new UPS contract are higher than all wage increases given to part-timers in the last 40 years combined. For the first time ever, the Teamsters successfully clawed back concessions at UPS made in previous contracts. This historic new 5-year agreement is by far the best contract ever secured for American workers at UPS. Throughout our campaign, it was necessary to show the public what it looks like when real people get up in the morning and go to work at UPS. These are hard jobs. They wear people down. They are also essential jobs in every sense of the word. Today's world, all of us rely on parcel delivery more than we ever have before. This country does not move without the hard work of Teamsters at UPS. This includes the package car drivers in the iconic brown trucks, the feeder drivers making long-haul deliveries, the women and men getting up at 3 a.m. to work those warehouses, the unsung heroes the public never sees who move those boxes to load and unload those trucks. None of us are getting our packages without those dedicated part-time workers. The more we told the story of UPS Teamsters, the stronger our fight got against this giant corporation. Every poll showed the public was on the side of the workers. The American people will always appreciate and respect hard work. Our members knew that and felt it every week of our battle for a new agreement. When all was said and done, UPS Teamsters won a $30 billion contract. We did it without being forced to go on strike, by running a fierce practice picket campaign nationwide, and by fighting harder than ever before at the bargaining table. This is a contract that sets the tone of what's happening in the labor movement today. Interest in unions is at an all-time high, and for good reasons. Just look at a unionized company like UPS and compare it to non-union Amazon, who do the same job every single day. Both companies have tough, stressful working environments, but workers at Amazon are twice as likely to be injured on the job. Workers at Amazon are under constant surveillance and fear of losing their jobs. A regular package car driver at UPS makes twice as much as an Amazon delivery driver under the independent contractor model. Under the Teamsters' new agreement, UPS workers are the highest paid delivery drivers in America. Full-time UPS Teamsters receive more than $40 per hour in benefits compared to Amazon drivers who receive a benefit package of less than $10 per hour. Part-time UPSers receive 4 times more in hourly benefits than current warehouse workers at Amazon. Thanks to a Teamster contract, there's no comparing UPS Teamsters and non-union Amazon employees and how they are compensated or treated. For a company as rich as Amazon to treat their employees so badly is a disgrace. I want the members of this committee to ask themselves this: would you want your child to deliver packages for Amazon knowing the company's long track record of abusive mistreatment of workers? You cannot possibly answer this in the affirmative, not one of you. When you go to work at UPS as a Teamster, you get the highest wages in the industry, you get a pension, you get real protections on the job, and you get a fully paid health care plan that's better than the one I have as a general president of the Teamsters. Where else are you seeing that across this U.S. economy? Virtually nowhere. This is why there were so many stories online about job searches online for UPS careers after we ratified this contract. This is why Amazon gave warehouse workers a raise while the Teamsters were winning our contract fight at UPS. I'm sure my friend Shawn Fain can say a word or two about the raises given out at Tesla and Toyota following his union's victories against the Big Three as well. There is no coincidence here. Union victories and contract wins don't just affect union members. They positively impact all working people in this country. As we speak, 5,000 Teamsters nationwide are negotiating a new contract with Anheuser-Busch. Right now, we have more than 1,100 Teamsters standing up to DHL to bargain a first contract at the Cincinnati Northern Kentucky Airport. In a few months, more than 7,000 Teamsters in Hollywood will fight along IATSE to take on the big movie and TV studios. Just as the WGA and the SAG-AFTRA members were forced out on strike this year, we have our own battle brewing with the AMPTP. The fight to raise wages and improve the standard of living for American workers never ends. It's an uphill battle every day against giant corporations who want to pocket all the money or spend it on gaming our political system. American labor laws do nothing when employers refuse to negotiate a first contract after workers choose to join a union. This is one of the primary reasons why union membership continues to decline despite workers' interest in unions being higher than ever. American workers want unions. They have a right to join or form a union, but employers will try everything they can to deny that right to working people. When these same people have friends on Capitol Hill who help them get away with it, the potential for workers to get ahead in this country further disappears. If we want to make America a better country, we have to stop letting corporations destroy the middle class through their abuse and exploitation of workers. We have to advocate for workers and really fight for them. And it can't just be the Teamsters doing the heavy lifting. We need your help. We need our elected officials to do more and do what's right. In recent months, the Teamsters have been building greater bipartisan support across our government to protect workers' interests. This includes senators and representatives brave enough to put into writing their support for UPS Teamsters fighting for just contracts. Most recently, Republicans and Democrats in this chamber continue to stand up to back our efforts to rebuild good union freight jobs in the wake of Yellow's collapse. From Senator Josh Hawley to Senator Roger Marshall to Senator Elizabeth Warren and Senator Bernie Sanders, the Teamsters are eager to build bipartisan coalitions where we can help working people. This is what it should be about. We have to put more money in workers' pockets. That's what the Teamsters just did at UPS. It's what unions are doing all over the country, and American workers are paying attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next witness is Sara Nelson, the International President of the Association of Flight Attendants, Communication Workers of America. Ms. Nelson started as a flight attendant at United Airlines in 1996. She's been serving as the International President of AFA-CWA since 2014. Ms. Nelson, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Chairman Sanders, Dr. Cassidy, and members of the full committee for the opportunity to testify here today, and especially to get some time with my union brothers, Shawn and Shawn. I'm a 27-year union flight attendant and president of the Association of Flight Attendants, CWA, representing flight attendants at 20 airlines. Alongside our sister union, the Association of Professional Flight Attendants, we represent 80,000 flight attendants in total. We work closely with our partner union, CWA, and the millions of transportation workers and union members who are the backbone of our economy. Amy King, Michael Turow, Amy Jarrett, Robert Fangman, Catherine Labore, Al Marchand, Alicia Titus, Victor Saracini, Michael Horrocks, Jesus Sanchez, Marianne McFarland. This was the crew of United Airlines Flight 175. You know this flight. It's the one you can picture crashing into the South Tower of the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001, because all cameras were trained on the site after American Flight 11 hit the North Tower 17 minutes earlier. But this wasn't just any flight attendant crew. These were my friends, my flying partners, and members of my union. In the 50 years before I was hired, my union fought through massive discrimination to make our jobs one that anyone with the heart of a flight attendant could do, and built up the career with a living wage, comprehensive health care, including specific needs for women, a pension, and safety in the cabin for our passengers, too. But everything changed the moment my friends died. While we grieved and fought like hell to support half of our Boston-based who lost their jobs nearly overnight, crisis capitalists were already plotting to break our union contracts and redefine the value of our jobs. We lost over 100,000 aviation jobs practically overnight. Bankruptcies cut our pay, our staffing, shifted the cost of health care to us, and when $80 million would have saved our flight attendant pension plan, the court approved termination instead, while at the same time awarding $400 million to the top executives. There was no government bailout, but aviation workers were forced to give $81 billion in concessions to save the airlines, much like the auto workers were forced to give massive concessions to save Ford, Chrysler, and GM. The airline industry was heavily union, but after Ronald Reagan fired the air traffic controllers in 1981 and even sent several to jail for the strike, corporate America knew it was open season on unions. I soon learned personally and painfully the reality that an injury to one is an injury to all. As union density declined to just 6% of the private sector workforce, our capitalist economy has unraveled the American dream, and we're fighting to get it back. In 2020, aviation unions were set to negotiate real improvements for the first time since 9/11, and we needed them too. The cuts we endured turned a generation of workers away from careers in aviation. But when the pandemic hit, we were not about to go backward again. We fought for and won the historic Workers First Relief Program, the Payroll Support Program, even though we put constraints on executives with no stock buybacks and caps on executive compensation well after the relief period. Our plan saved our jobs, our airlines, and with the help of nearly every senator on this committee, and aviation was the only industry to not grow in inequality during the pandemic. We've also successfully stopped the airlines from announcing new stock buyback plans since the prohibition ended last year. They must fix the operation for the American public and the workers and negotiate union contracts before sending cash to Wall Street. There was one airline with the lowest union density that fought only during that time to keep out of the law the requirement that they could not spend any federal dollars on union busting. Delta Airlines spent their time doing that and then took the taxpayers' money and cut hours for workers as they were not supposed to do because there were not unions there to hold them accountable like we were at the other airlines. We have tiers in the airline industry too. The regional airlines that do work for the major airlines, United, American, Delta, and Alaska, are paid 45% less on average, working the same flights, doing 40% of the domestic lift in this country. We have to end those tiers, and we have an organizing campaign at the largest regional carrier right now, SkyWest Airlines. SkyWest has, for a very long time, tried to keep the wool over workers' eyes by saying that they already have a union, but it's an illegal company union. And when Teresa Grange, nearly 25-year employee with SkyWest and honored, and Shane Price, 9-year employee, stood up and showed that this company union was a sham and that their voting system was a sham, they were fired for their union organizing. This committee needs to have oversight over that and put a check on it. The laws we have today were eroded since they were first enacted and took shape. The oldest law, labor law, the Railway Labor Act, has been eroded. There has been no reduction in the right to strike, and we routinely got contracts when the right to strike was enacted, and there was a clear question before the companies and the union members in order to reach agreements rather than to go on strike. But the administration has not allowed that release in 2 decades, with the exception of one time. And that is why we are suffering now, today, in contract bargaining, where American Airlines has not had a raise since 2019, the flight attendants. They're asking for a 33% wage increase because to keep up with inflation, they need at least 22%. And if we're going to get ahead from where we were since 9/11, we have to have more than that. We need scheduling rules, and we need our time back. Our time is controlled by these companies, and the consumers are hurt by that too. We're looking for scheduling rules and investments in the airlines so that we are not left out stranded. These are the things that we are negotiating for right now. American flight attendants voted 99.5% for a strike and will be asking for a release soon. United Airlines and Alaska Airlines is not far behind them. I have a question for this committee and a message for the billionaires who want to bleed the working class dry. To the billionaires, I say, there is plenty for everyone. You can be fabulously wealthy, but if you continue to try to keep us poor, you will find that the working people are not going to take it anymore. To the members of this committee, to the elected leaders across the country and around the world, I ask you the question that working people have asked for generations. Which side are you on? Thank you to Chairman Sanders and Dr. Cassidy for the opportunity to testify. Unions are necessary for a stable economy, our safety, our security, and our democracy. Nothing is more important for our nation to succeed than unions, collective bargaining, dialogue between divergent groups, solutions to the existential threats that we face, and the strength and future of our world and nation. The Association of Flight Attendants, CWA, is prepared to do our part, and I look forward to doing that with you and your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next witness is Diana Furcott Roth, the Director of the Center for Energy, Climate, and Environment and the Herbert and Joyce Morgan Fellow in Energy and Environmental Policy at the Heritage Foundation. Ms. Furcott Roth is an Oxford-educated economist. Pardon me? All right.
I get to introduce you. So,
Yeah.
and I'll also point out that the chairman's witnesses all got at least a minute and a half or 2 minutes more to speak. So,
We'll have the same time.
I knew
you.
you would do that. Very gracious. I'm pleased to introduce a witness whose work focuses on policies promoting economic growth and individual freedom. Diana Furcott Roth is the director of the Center for Energy, Climate, and Environment at the Heritage Foundation and an adjunct professor of economics at George Washington University. She's worked in senior roles in the White House and also served in appointed positions at several agencies. The author or co-author of 6 books and hundreds of articles on economic policy, including Regulating to Disaster, How Green Jobs Policies Are Destroying America's Economy. Ms. Furcott Roth's testimony will discuss the implications to the U.S. auto industry of the Biden administration's EV mandates and how the recent UAW agreement with automakers accelerates the loss of American auto jobs. She'll also testify on the reasons workers choose not to join a union. Ms. Furcott Roth received economics degrees from Swarthmore College and Oxford University. Welcome. We appreciate you being here and look forward to your testimony.
Thank you very much, Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Dr. Cassidy, members of the committee. I'm honored to be invited to testify before you today. The UAW had such a single-minded focus on getting more money for their members that they forgot even to try to help out farmers, families, and other workers and unions. The Biden administration's electric vehicle mandate puts the economy at the mercy of government dictates in a planned economy that will destroy the livelihoods of small business, non-unionized workers, and eventually even unionized auto workers without making car companies more competitive or solving climate change challenges. This will put our children's future at the mercy of China. If the UAW were truly interested in helping its members and American families, it would have pushed for Detroit and other auto companies to try to continue to make the internal combustion engines and hybrids that Americans want to buy, rather than going all electric in 2035. What would help all American working families is getting rid of the Biden EV mandate, which you, senators, and the House of Representatives did not pass. Instead, the UAW talks on its website of a, quote, just transition to electric vehicles. It's not justice to make cars that are so expensive that most Americans can't afford to buy them. The electric version of the F-150 pickup truck costs $26,000 more than the gasoline version. It loses battery range when it's cold or when it has to tow something, and it takes an hour to recharge, and that's if the charger works and no one is ahead of you in line. Plus, going electric offshores American jobs to China, including slave labor in Xinjiang, because the Chinese make 80% of the world's batteries. Ford Motor Company President Jim Farley estimated that with all EVs, the auto industry will need 400,000 fewer jobs in the long run. The EV plan is poison for auto workers, small businesses such as plumbers and electricians, and auto repair shops and farmers who rely on gasoline-powered engines for pickup trucks and equipment. Ford is losing $60,000 per EV sold, and unsold EVs are piling up on dealers' lots. GM and Ford announced they are cutting back on projections of EV sales and lowering production targets for cars and batteries and postponing over $15 billion in EV investment. There will also be, with EVs, layoffs in auto parts companies and among your local mechanics who repair your gasoline-powered cars. Unions act in their own interests, as can be seen by the simple focus on UAW member pay at the cost of the interests of members of other unions. When auto workers were on strike pay of $500 a week, union leaders were still collecting their full salaries, in some cases over $250,000 a year. Only 10% of American workers and 6% of American private sector workers belong to a union in 2022, down from 33% in the 1950s and 20% in the 1980s. But some members of Congress are still trying to push Americans into unions. Why the decline in membership? Union corruption is endemic, and Americans don't like it. Teamsters drove yellow trucking into bankruptcy with a loss of 30,000 jobs. Stellantis, former Fiat Chrysler, and the UAW are still under federal oversight. Stellantis admitted to making more than $3.5 million in illegal payments to UAW union bosses, including, and I quote, extravagant meals, rounds of golf, lavish parties for the UAW International Executive Board, an Italian-made shotgun, clothing, designer shoes, and other personal items paid for with credit cards issued by the Joint Training Center, which was the UAW Chrysler Skill Development and Training Program. FCA executives also paid off the $262,000 home mortgage of former UAW Vice President General Holyfield. Holyfield and his widow also received hundreds of thousands of dollars directed through Holyfield's purported charitable organization. I'd like to submit the U.S. Office of Eastern District of Michigan, March 1, 2021 press release on Fiat Chrysler's guilty plea for the record. Working families also don't want to pay money into failed pensions. Last year, Congress spent $36 billion in taxpayer funds to shore up failing union pension plans, such as the Central States Pension Fund. Otherwise, 2.5 million union workers and retirees would not have received their promised pensions because unions didn't take care to fund members' pensions, although their own pensions were fully funded. Even after the massive taxpayer-funded bailout, plans are in trouble. In 2023, the Labor Department listed 45 union plans in critical status, which is defined as less than 65% funded, or in endangered status, with less than 80% funded. Unions desperately need new workers to join because they pay contributions to pension plans for many years without withdrawing money. Well, this year's critical status notices, and it's on the Department of Labor website, include bakery drivers, Local 802 pension fund, IBT, Local 840 pension plan, iron workers, bricklayers, carpenters, the Local 945 IBT pension plan, Teamsters Local 469 pension plan. I don't have time to read them all, so I'd like to submit the entire 2023 Department of Labor list for the record. Union leaders and their allies on Capitol Hill believe the way to increase membership after decades of decline is to pass the Richard L. Trumka Protecting the Right to Organize PRO Act, which would force workers into corrupt unions with unfunded pensions. The PRO Act would harm millions of small businesses and people who work as independent contractors and in the franchise business center. Many would lose businesses and their jobs. It would weaken the right to a secret ballot in elections for union representation, even though Mr. Fain, seated here, insisted on a secret ballot for his election as union president. This gives union officials the power to intimidate workers because they know how they vote, where they live, and where their children go to school. In our highly competitive economy with 9.6 million unfilled jobs, workers have many options and shouldn't be forced by the PRO Act to pay union dues and fund failing union pension plans. Workers don't trust union leaders, and the new UAW contract provides additional justification. Many thanks.
Thank you. Senator Cassidy, you can introduce the next.
Yes. My next witness is Shawn Higgins. Mr. Higgins is a research fellow at the Competitive Enterprise Institute specializing in labor and employment issues. As a journalist, he has covered the intersection of politics and economics for 2 decades. He was senior writer for the Washington Examiner, Washington correspondent for Investors Business Daily, and a contributor to publications including Reason Magazine and National Review Online. His scholarship includes a study on the long-forgotten legislative history of the National Labor Relations Board Act and an analysis of the PRO Act. His testimony will discuss how the NLRA was intended to protect the rights of individual workers to join or not join a union, and how the PRO Act does little to expand the rights of individual workers. Mr. Higgins, welcome. Thanks for being here. We look forward to your testimony.
Thank you. I'll try and keep this within 5 minutes. Chairman Sanders, Dr. Cassidy, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Shawn Higgins, and I'm a research fellow for the Competitive Enterprise Institute. CEI first and foremost stands for the individual worker. We support the worker's right to engage in collective bargaining and the right to refrain from engaging in it. We support the rights of the individual worker to do as they choose and impose any encroachment upon those rights. Preserving the right to dissent, to stand apart from and oppose the crowd, no matter how unpopular that stance might be to others, is important and should be protected just as much in the sphere of labor as it is in civil rights. Those rights must be remembered as we consider the impact of labor unions. I would like to start by discussing a bit about the National Labor Relations Act itself, because my research suggests the principal author of the act would agree. The introductory section of the law says, quote, "It is declared to be the policy of the United States to eliminate the causes of certain substantial obstructions to the free flow of commerce and to mitigate and eliminate these obstructions when they have occurred by encouraging the practice and procedure of collective bargaining," unquote. The section's use of the word encouraging is often cited by individuals as the rationale for legislation or federal rules designed to prod workers into joining unions, that the federal government's role is to encourage unionization. That is not what the law's author, New York Senator Robert Wagner, a Democrat, said at the time of its passage, however. His view was that the government should be a neutral arbiter. It would defend the rights of those who sought to engage in collective bargaining, provided that doing so was their own affirmative choice. In testimony before this very same committee in 1935, Senator Wagner said, quote, "That is all this bill does so far as I can see. It leaves the worker a free man to organize or not to organize as he chooses, and that is all it does." Lest you think I'm taking a single section out of context, in another exchange with another witness in the hearings, Columbia University economist Dr. Paul Brissenden, Senator Wagner denounced the, quote, "propaganda, which has been pretty widespread, that the purpose of this act is to impose some particular union upon the manufacturers of the United States. This bill does not do anything of this kind, except that it does make the worker a free man so he may decide whether he wants a union or not, and if he wants one, what particular union he wants to represent him, or whether he wants to remain unorganized," unquote. The NLRA, it should be understood, was originally fix-it legislation. Collective bargaining rights for private sector workers in general was first granted in 1933's National Industrial Recovery Act. With federal law now affirming the right to collective bargaining, unions at the time made a concerted push to organize industries that had previously resisted it. The industrial leaders at the time fought this with strikebreakers, and 1934 became one of the bloodiest years ever for labor unrest. This tied up all manner of commerce. Factories went idle, goods didn't ship, as the country was still trying to get out of the Great Depression. A second related problem emerged. Corporations responded to the new federal law with a "if you can't beat 'em, join 'em" attitude, and created unions of their own for their employees to join. If you worked for GM, congratulations, you could now join the Chevrolet Employees Association. Quite a few GM employees did. The degree to which they were pressured to do so was unclear. The independent unions of the time called these company unions sham organizations for the obvious reason. A company-run union has a clear conflict of interest and was therefore unlikely to properly serve the interests of the workers. That said, such organizations did not appear to be illegal under the Industrial Recovery Act. Wagner's NLRA was meant to rectify this, to affirm the right to collective bargaining, while also ensuring that workers were not coerced into joining labor unions they did not wish to join or did not reflect their interests. Quote, that is what I'm interested in. Whatever the men want to do, if they want to bargain individually or through an organization within a plant, that is all right, only if it is the free choice of the men," Wagner told this committee. It should be further noted that the NLRA's section encouraging collective bargaining follows a preamble about certain substantial obstructions to the free flow of commerce and the need to mitigate and eliminate these obstructions when they have occurred. In short, encouraging collective bargaining is called for as a solution when labor unrest has created a ripple effect that threatens the broader economy. This is a reference to the violence that occurred in the year before the law's passage. The purpose of this hearing is to tout and promote unions as a boon to the economy and to workers. CEI does support a worker's right to engage in collective bargaining. It also supports a worker's right not to engage or to otherwise opt out. Attempts to expand collective bargaining by workers can easily fall into the trap of coercing workers, of making them do things on the basis of "for your own good." The Protecting the Right to Organize Act would, for example, strip workers in 27 states of the right to decide for themselves if they wish to join or otherwise support a union. Nothing about a right to work law prevents workers from joining or being active in unions if they wish, however. They simply preserve the right of the individual to dissent. The best force for raising the lot of the individual worker is a strong economy with a tight labor market. We've seen over the last year and a half what happens when employers are put in the position of having to compete for workers. Wages rise and benefits expand on their own. With that, I thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Now we begin the questioning. Let me ask one question to the three union representatives here, and that it's a two-part question. The first part is, in your experience, how do workers feel about the reality that their CEOs in America now make 350 times more than the average worker? That's question number one. Question number two, what plans do you have to organize the unorganized in your areas of influence. Mr. Fain?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess in both those questions, I mean, the CEO pay issue, obviously, we highlighted that a lot throughout the process, and, it's despicable that, that someone, it would take one of our workers 350 years to make what a CEO makes in a year.
The head of GM made how much? Makes,
29 million.
okay, and starting wages at one of the automobile plants was what?
Prior to this contract, 16 something an hour. But the sad irony in this is just the fact that, workers in this country are fed up, and that's what this is all about. And it doesn't just matter for UAW members, it's just working class people in general. We have to ask ourselves what kind of society we want to live in. And CEO pays run rampant. We hear the talk about competition all the time, of being competitive, and us being competitive with the transplants. But it's funny, I don't hear that talk when it comes to CEO pay. The average big three CEOs make almost 25 million, 30 million a year. The average CEOs of the transplants make around anywhere from 3 to 5 million. But we never hear that argument.
All right, let me ask you the second part of the question, organizing efforts. What plans do you have to organize unorganized workers?
We're going to organize like hell. I've said this throughout the last year, that when you bargain good agreements, when you set a standard, people want to be a part of that success. And it's what changed my grandparents' life. It's what changed millions of workers' lives in this country back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s and 60s. And so, we've had thousands of workers from non-union plants reach out throughout this process, want to be a part of this, and we're going to go to work.
Mr. Bryan, same question. How do workers in general, in your experience, feel about huge income and wealth inequality we're seeing? What kind of organizing efforts are you planning?
Well, I think first and foremost.
Microphone, please.
Sorry. I think first and foremost, Chairman Sanders, our members obviously want to be rewarded for the work that they do. And, I know there was, prior to us coming to the record settlement with UPS and many other agreements that we've negotiated in the last 20 months, is that, people that have never performed the job, people that have never touched a package, people that have never went out and delivered through the toughest times, the pandemic, putting themselves and their family at risk, rewarding themselves with record bonuses and pay, and obviously record profits, all the while our members were status quo. There's no doubt that CEO pay has increased, I think, since 1979 on the average of 1,400%. And I think the average U.S. worker, both non-union and union combined, has only increased by about 17%. So there is a huge disparity there, and our members don't like it. But the reality is that's why we have the ability to collectively bargain and hold these employers accountable and actually state facts for the record on what our members do. As far as organizing goes, we are utilizing any and all collective bargaining agreements, especially now, as a template to show the non-union workers the benefits and protections that they will receive when they join a union. And there's no better testimonial than actually holding a contract that's been signed by an employer that guarantees the terms and conditions. Now, if you would ask a non-union employer or if you ask someone that's non-union to go to their employer and say, could you guarantee me these, would that non-union employer sign that?
Okay, Ms. Nelson?
Flight attendants and other workers are enraged that when they can't make ends meet, that they've got every person in the house working 2 and 3 jobs or overtime just to try to get by, and still scraping from paycheck to paycheck, that other people are living in lavish conditions, that airline executives are hiring private jets to fly them out of a city that no one else who has to buy a consumer seat can get anywhere from. They're absolutely outraged by it, and that's why they're organizing. Delta Airlines has made twice in billions what the other airlines have made. They have ridden off of the backs of the employees who have made that airline successful, and they have not paid the same in pay and benefits. And that's why Delta flight attendants, Delta mechanics with the Teamsters, and Delta ramp agents with the International Association of Machinists are organizing right now to try to take back what's theirs. As I said before, the SkyWest flight attendants have woken up to what their airlines have tried to do to pull the wool over their eyes, and they contacted us, and we're eager to organize. So we're supporting organizing for over 40,000 workers right now, with our union of just over 50,000 workers. And these airlines and these other companies are spending billions of dollars on union avoidance rather than investing in the companies to make them better for the consumer and the employees, wasting that money. But there's another way to go. And Microsoft has decided that it is better to sign a union neutrality agreement with the union to give the employees the free right to join the union. And when a worker comes to a manager to ask them what they should know about the union, they are giving the supervisors the instruction to tell them, go to the union website. That's how it should be done. That's what freedom is. And that's what it would look like to have a free society and an equal society, is to give workers the power to actually bargain their fair share.
Thank you. Senator Cassidy.
I'm going to defer to Coach Tuberville first, but I'm going to ask that the two documents that Ms. Furchtgott-Roth mentioned be added to the unanimous consent that these be added.
Without objection.
Senator Tuberville?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today. Mr. Higgins, our economy is in incredibly shaky position. Inflation is off the charts, especially after COVID. With all the strikes over the last few years, has that played an impact on our economy?
Have the strikes
Yes.
played in?
Yes.
I don't know that they've had much of an impact as of yet, but certainly the increases in pay is going to have creates the problem of potential wage price spiral, and that will increase the inflation itself.
Yeah. Yeah. Mr. O'Brien, we had a hearing not too long ago about we're going to be probably over 1 million truck drivers short in the next 5, 6, 7 years. What's the Teamsters doing in terms of recruiting and planning for this in terms of recruiting and training?
Well, I think first and foremost, what I testified to earlier is very helpful as a result of us settling a record UPS agreement. I think at the previous hearing, there was some numbers put out there where UPS drivers only made $59,000 per year. That's not true. On their own website, they make $162,000 per year. So by us raising industry standards, that will help in the recruitment. We also have a very robust military training program where people come back from the military and we train them and place them in companies like ABF, United Postal Service, T-Force, and many other partners that we have as employers. And I just want to be clear, not every relationship that we have with employers is adversarial. We work day and night to make sure that we create opportunities so that these companies can be successful. There's some companies that obviously can't, and we bear the blunt of that, but we do work with our partners to make sure that we fulfill the needs of this country and keep supply chain moving.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Fain, Biden administration's prioritizing climate change. We all know that. We've seen it. We've felt the repercussions from it going to electric vehicles. In 2027 and beyond, 2/3 of the new vehicles on the road are supposed to be EV. Going through all those EPA regulations are out of sight. So what's your thoughts on the availability of the union jobs and the push to EVs in the automatic EV industry?
Thank you. Look, we believe in a green economy. We always have been. The UAW has always led the way when it comes to environmental issues.
Does it cut back on jobs? I keep hearing that.
So it doesn't have to. Through this contract, we didn't just only bargain for battery work. I think what gets lost in this, there's battery tray work, there's electric drive motor work, there's e-motors and housing and covers. We negotiated for all those things. But the other thing we also did was we negotiated to bring combustible engine work back to some of our plants from Mexico and other areas. And so, we have to see the direction it goes, but we're going to embrace this. We're not going to run from it. But our biggest concern through all this is it needs to be a just transition in this process where workers aren't left behind.
Is it true that we're building most of our combustible engines south of the border now?
Some, not most. I mean, we have in the big three, I mean, we have several engine plants and transmission plants. Some of that's ramped down due to this transition, but we secured things in this contract to, obviously, like I said, to bring work back. And and protect on both sides of this.
Yeah, Ms. Nelson, we all fly quite a bit. What is the biggest complaint from flight attendants? And don't give me money, I'm not talking about money. What is the biggest complaint now where we can get more qualified, consistent, flight attendants on flights?
What's very difficult is that today it is extremely combative in the cabin, and we have fewer staff than we ever have. So there's fewer flight attendants
I
per
understand that,
passenger.
but that's not going to get any better. We got to have people to break up these fights, obviously.
Yes, absolutely. And leadership to encourage people to come together and understand that we can actually safely get from one place to another without having a brawl is very helpful. So appreciate leaders around the country talking about unity and talking about how we're better off when we work together to ensure that safety and security come first and that people can come to work without being fearful of being a punching bag.
Yeah, I think we'd all agree too. We got to get more people back to work. Training. I came from the education field, getting more kids into technical training other than going to a four-year school that they're not going to get anything out of, to be able to get a job like most of you, supply. So thank you for being here today. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we are going to work on an apprenticeship program. I think that's vitally important. Senator Casey.
Mr. Chairman, thanks for having this hearing, you and the ranking member, and bringing in leaders to talk about workers and corporate greed, but also the promise of union organizing. And we're so grateful to be with these leaders. I wanted to start with obviously a related issue, and that's what has been termed greedflation. We just did a report about this last week. When major corporations are taking advantage of consumers by jacking up prices and blaming inflation, just because they can, without any kind of scrutiny. And when they jack up those prices, they hurt a lot of families. And that's what we're seeing all across the country. Here's the reality: just between 20 and 21, just between those few years, corporate profits rose 75%, 5 times the rate of inflation. That is, I think, for so many Americans, an abomination. When corporate profits are exploding by 75%, 5 times faster than inflation. When I travel across Pennsylvania, I hear about this every single day, whether it's people trying to pay their grocery bill or other household or family expenses. And greedflation is impacting our families. This is documented. This isn't some theory. We can document it, and we do in the report. And it's, if anything, it's elevated the significance of unions and why union organizing has never been more important. To give a worker and his or her family a shot at being able to make ends meet because they have the benefit of a union. And unions like those that are represented here today are critically important in this fight for workers. Strengthening workers' rights and protections, including the fundamental right to organize, which, by the way, is under threat. And anyone who thinks just because we had a legislation in 1935, the National Labor Relations Act, that everything's okay, every day of the week that right is under threat across the country. It's essential, that right to organize is essential to building an economy that works for all Americans. So my first question is, President Fain, not just because you've had a couple successful months with your organizing, but I'll start with you. As you know from the deal, the historic deal that you just negotiated, securing wage gains for auto workers, the big three are another example of this. They've seen record profits, and they've given their CEOs millions in salaries and bonuses while fighting to deny their workers a raise and keep their car prices high. How has corporate greed affected American car prices and worker wages?
Things on my mind. When you talk about corporate profits exploding, I mean, the thing I don't want to get lost is that same time they were exploding, worker pay was regressing, and conditions were regressing. I've had, Mr. Higgins was talking about how increases in pay will impact the economy negatively. This goes back to the fear-mongering that takes place. Anytime we bargain a good contract, the next narrative that gets put out there is that, the world's going to end because working-class people make a livable wage, and it's going to drive the price of vehicles up. But when you talk about what's happened the last 4 years, there's a sad irony to me. I didn't hear anything about this over the last 4 years. The price of vehicles went up 30 to 35% over the last 4 years. That wasn't due to worker pay going up, wasn't due to our benefits changing. It was due to one thing: corporate greed and consumer price gouging. And that's what's got to change in this country. And it's one thing I've learned throughout this process, throughout this bargaining process, and throughout my career is, I've listened to analysts and people that, write op-eds and things, and one thing I've learned is that most of these people have no clue what the hell's even going on in the work we do. And so, they might be great professors, great, pundits, but at the end of the day, I've been at the bargaining table. I've been in the factory, working on the shop floor. Working class people matter, and when working class people withhold their labor, nothing moves. And that's what people need to realize in this country. Billionaire class can build all the factories they want. If workers refuse to withhold their labor, they won't build a thing. And so, but corporate greed and consumer price gouging is all that's behind this.
Mr. Chairman, could I just add something for the record? If I could ask consent to submit for the record this greedflation report that we released last week.
Without objection.
Thank
Senator
you, Mr.
Cassidy.
Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I got a few minutes since someone asked people to be brief. Mr. Fain, the headline just came across. Stellantis offers buyouts and early retirement to 6,400 U.S. non-union workers as the auto industry hits turbulence. Now, you don't know for sure, but after the very good contract you awarded, they're now laying off 6,400 people.
Yeah.
It seems like a little bit of a tube of toothpaste. If you squeeze here, it's going to do something down there. And I think that would be something that Ms. Furchtgott-Roth would point out. Any thoughts on that? And again, be brief, because I got other questions.
Talking to the mic.
They don't have to.
Yeah, all right.
I'm sorry?
Talking to the mic, please.
I'll give you 12 billion reasons why that doesn't have to happen, okay? When Stellantis took over, they went on a price cutting, on a labor cost cutting
Now,
initiative.
but that was about a decade ago, so be
No,
thank you.
Stellantis just took over, within the last 4 years.
Okay.
But when they took over, they wanted to cut their way to profitability, but they do it on the backs of workers, and they don't have to cut those jobs. They chose to cut those jobs. Has nothing to do with our contract. They made $12 billion in the first 6 months of this year, and are continuing to make billions as we went through the bargaining process. So, again, to me, it's short-sighted goals to recognize profits, and I've heard this said over and over by leaders in the past. You can't cut your way to profitability, and it's a short-sighted way of doing business, and it's not sustainable for the long term. So,
Okay, so Mr. O'Brien, yellow trucking is obviously going belly up, it appears. And they had come to the Teamsters in June, I'm just reading press reports, and asked for some help. And it specifically mentioned you that we're not going to, get tough attitude is how the article put it. And now they've gone belly up. There's reports that the Teamsters came back in August to try and make things better, but by that time it was too late. Now, there it seems, again, going back to the witnesses, Mr. Higgins and Ms. FGR, that this kind of approach brought a company under, and now we have a lot of Teamsters who are going to be unemployed.
All due respect, Dr. Cassidy. That's inaccurate on the yellow situation. This yellow situation has been going on since 2009, where our members have given back in concessions with the recommendation of the union to try and save this company since 2009, $5 billion in wages and benefits. And this company was awarded under the Trump administration a $700 million loan, right? And the company's just been mismanaged. And they did not come to us in August. They came to us early on. We tried to work with them and find solutions to the problem. All the while, after their initial meetings, they started, and we found this after the fact, they started draining. They told us they'd be out of money by August. and that if we didn't help them, then they would go under. All the while, they were taking their executive bonuses, their CEO pays, and,
But in the scheme of things,
they can blame anybody they want. That company was mismanaged since 2009. There's facts and records to show exactly what our members have given.
And I won't argue about the quality of their management. It does seem, though, that when I read the benefit packages that the drivers got, they would argue that they could not afford that. But that's their perspective. And I'm sorry, I just have limited time. Ms. Furchtgott-Roth, I remember distinctly that Mr. Fain had made comments that the rapid transition to all EV vehicles was part of what was contributing to the loss of jobs. I saw a cartoon, the green economy will create jobs. Unfortunately, most of them are in China. You commented as well on that in your testimony. In response to Coach Tuberville, Mr. Fain kind of soft-pedaled that, but any thoughts on that? In effect, President Biden's environmental policies have contributed to some of this loss of jobs in the auto industry.
Microphone.
Mr. Fain did say very clearly in April of this year, shame on politicians for moving forward to 100% EVs because this is bad for our auto workers' jobs. So I was especially puzzled why, during the negotiations, he didn't try to get these auto workers to drop their own self-imposed goal of going all EV by 2035. And Mr. Fain has just said that he's got some of the internal combustion engines to move back from offshore, but they're not going to be able to use them after 2035. At least they say they're not going to be able to use them. They say they're not going to use them. So why is that? It's not under the law. So he should be able to persuade them that his members' jobs are more important, plus what Americans want to buy, small businesses, farmers, they all need cars with internal combustion engines.
Mr. O'Brien, this is also the help committee, and the P stands for pensions. And it was mentioned earlier, I think, by Mr. Higgins, that the Central States Pension Fund had received money to help bail out their, I think, $36 billion or something like that, to bail out their in arrears. It's my understanding that the roster submitted by the Central States Pension Fund had nearly 3,500 dead individuals submitted to the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation. Somebody commented it's a little bit like the voting rolls in Chicago. But as a result of this, the pension fund was awarded $127 million in additional bailout money. Now, is the pension fund going to refund that to the American people?
Well, I would assume it would, and I assume the government would go after that if that's
I
really
think
what
this
happened.
administration has made the decision that they're not going to, but that's the kind of administration decision. That's actually not kind of a taxpayer-type decision.
Well, look, I'll go on record as saying if someone was given something they weren't entitled to, they should refund it.
Sounds great. Can I quickly on Mr. Higgins? Mr. Higgins, you mentioned on the joint employer rule, it's a boon to employees. I think my understanding is if you have a Subway and you've got 7 employees and 4 of them vote to unionize, that young entrepreneur or that person of color who's got their first business has to unionize. And of course, with increased cost and hassle. Any quick comments on that? Because the chair is being indulgent, but still, quick comments?
Well, as far as the joint employer goes, it doesn't directly impact unionization itself, but in terms of it does sort of bleed back towards the corporate parent, and that's, I believe, the intent here. If you're organizing, you have to organize, in their franchisees, you have to organize them piecemeal by one. But if the franchisor is considered the joint employer for all of its franchisees, then you can simply direct your campaign at the franchisor corporation and do it that way. And I believe that's the sort of underlying impetus.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to begin by recognizing the incredible leadership of the 3 union leaders before us today. From winning historic gains at UPS and the Big 3 to protecting airline workers during the COVID pandemic, you've really served your members quite ably. Despite these bright spots, it has been a tough year for union workers in Wisconsin. President O'Brien, when you came before this committee earlier this year, I asked you about the announced closures of two Energizer battery plants in Wisconsin. These facilities in Fenimore and Portage were formerly Rayovac facilities. Rayovac was an iconic Wisconsin company. These workers, represented by the Teamsters, and by the way, I had a chance to visit with some of them just a few weeks ago in Fenimore. When Rayovac was acquired by Energizer in 2018, the Federal Trade Commission shocked investors when it appeared to really rubber stamp that merger with no conditions attached. By the way, that same merger was treated very differently by regulators in Europe. After the approval, consumers began paying higher prices for batteries, not lower. And nearly 600 Wisconsin union members stand to lose their jobs as the company moves those jobs to Singapore and North Carolina, both at facilities without represented union labor. I've urged the Federal Trade Commission to actually retroactively review that merger approval. I've asked them on 2 occasions so far without any luck. Then, in July in Wisconsin, Master Lock announced that it would close its Wisconsin plant, which has operated in downtown Milwaukee for nearly 100 years. Shortly after its parent company acquired a lock business from a competitor, the company decided to move 400 jobs, 330 of which are UAW members, to Mexico and to China. We have seen this playbook in Wisconsin before, and so I am currently working on legislation that would require the Federal Trade Commission to consider the impact of mergers on workers in addition to the other considerations, because the workers are the ones who bear the brunt of the quote-unquote efficiencies found after a consolidation. I'm really tired of seeing our high-wage union jobs in Wisconsin go to non-union states or abroad. These companies hire consultants who see cutting union jobs as the way to increase their margins, but I see it as cutting off your nose to spite your face. The truth is that unions provide the security and wages necessary for workers to develop skills, expertise, and institutional knowledge that are the bedrock of innovation and growth. But too many in corporate America are not interested in innovation or growth anymore. Many large companies only want to look at the very short-term quarterly capitalism, extract value, cut wages, close facilities, and increase buybacks, all to enrich themselves and their investors. So it's a big question with very little time left for the 3 of you. But how can we change that culture of corporate America to get these companies to see their union workforces as an asset to be grown instead of a cost to be cut?
Senator Baldwin is right. Very little time. Be very brief in your answers, please.
You know, first, I mean, when 26 billionaires have as much wealth as half of humanity, we have a crisis in this world. You know, I don't see these things, the Master Lock situation, I don't see it as any effort of efficiencies. I'm going to call it what it is. It's corporate greed at the expense of working class people. It's driving a race to the bottom. We have to want better for this country. I don't care what party someone is. If you truly believe that paying someone poverty wages is the pathway to a successful nation and a successful economy, I don't know what you're smoking. So, you know, we have to have a just transition in this EV. We have to look at workers' wages and benefits, and we've got to stop the race to the bottom.
Thank you. Mr. Ravaya?
I mean, it's just clear in that situation you described with Energizer, those jobs are gone. They're not coming back. And right now you have 600 people that have had long-term careers there who've raised families, put kids through college, and we're depending upon retiring out of there. They're working under a severance agreement, so those jobs are gone. I think, to sum it up quickly, we need more oversight over these mergers to make sure that, first off, we keep these jobs in America, but more importantly, we've got to mitigate any type of damages or tax on these workers for their ability to join a union as well. I mean, they're going to go to North Carolina, which is right to work, and it's proven that the median average wage in right to work states are far less than the non-right to work states. So we've got to have more oversight on these mergers and acquisitions.
I agree with you completely on everything that you said, Senator Baldwin, and we do need a better look at the impact of mergers on workers. In fact, actually, there has not really been a look at the impact on workers in the JetBlue Spirit merger, which is actually going to improve jobs and increase competition in the airline industry, giving one more airline at the highest level competition with the others to drive those jobs to better standards and also to give consumers better choice. So we need to have that. But we also need to have constraints on stock buybacks, and we need to move away from this idea of the quarterly earnings, because even the best CEOs that I have worked with who have wanted to run a very good company have been forced by the people who own the company. They are no longer the decision makers. They are driven to send more and more money to Wall Street rather than investing in the company, investing in the workers, and investing in what is going to be good for the consumers. So we have to remember that a rising tide lifts all boats, but the working class is the tide. And that's what we have to focus on.
Thank you. Senator Mullen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to get a little factual on what Mr. O'Brien just said about right-to-work states versus forced work states. According to the compensation data report, the U.S. Commerce Department, an average salary for private sector employee in 2019 was $4,000 higher than the average employee in forced union states, stating that right-to-work states pay more. Now, if we also want to break this down to statistics, which was quoted earlier by Mr. O'Brien, about wage differences, if you talk to the Bureau of Labor Statistics in non-union jobs, their average salaries raised 14.6% compared to 11% wage increase on unionized workers from 2020 to 2023. If you go back to the percentage of union workers, because if unions was working so well, then you'd see an increase in union jobs, not a decrease. 50 years ago, 33% of our labor force was union. Today, it's 10.1%. If you go back and you start looking at wage earned, if you actually compare comparable wages to ages, not a partisan point, but you go to all wages earned, not just comparing 16 and over to 54 to 64-year-old ages, you'll see that the actual average, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that if you subtract the union dues, it's actually higher. Non-union employees are getting paid by roughly 1 to 2%, which is exactly what union dues are, is 1 to 2% of their salary. So I just wanted to set the record straight on that, and that's coming from statistics, all right? Now, let's talk about Mr. O'Brien himself, his behavior. As everybody knows, and it's here in the last time, him and I kind of had a back and forth. Appreciate your demeanor today. It's quite different. But after you left here, you got pretty excited about the keyboard. In fact, you tweeted at me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And let me read what the last one said. It said, greedy CEO who pretends like he's self-made. Sir, I wish you was in the truck with me when I was building my plumbing company. Myself and my wife was running the office because I sure remember working pretty hard and long hours. Pretends like he's self-made. What a clown. Fraud. Always has been, always will be. Quit the tough guy act in these Senate hearings. You know where to find me, any place, anytime, cowboy. Sir, this is a time, this is a place. If you want to run your mouth, we can be two consenting adults. We can finish it here.
Okay, that's fine. Perfect.
You want to do it now?
I'd love to do it right now.
Well, stand your butt up then.
You stand your butt up.
Oh, hold on.
Big guy.
Oh, stop it.
Is that your solution every problem?
No, sit down.
why you're a clown.
Sit down.
Look at you.
You know, you're a United States Senator. Sit down.
Active.
Oh, okay.
Sit down, please.
All right.
Can I respond? Mr. Chairman?
Hold it. If
Hold
we
on.
can't, no,
This is
I have
what
the
he
mic.
said.
I'm sorry.
This is
Hold
what
it.
he said.
You'll have your time.
Okay.
Can I respond?
Oh, no, you can't. This is a hearing. And God knows the American people have enough of contempt for Congress. Let's not
I don't
make
like
it worse.
thugs and
You-
bullies.
You have,
And that's
you
what-
have
I don't
the
like
mic.
you, because you
Hold
just
it.
described yourself.
Hold it. You have the mic.
Yeah.
You have time.
All right.
Make your statement.
Then let's do this, because I did challenge you, and I accepted your challenge and you went quiet.
No, I didn't go quiet. I was,
Hold on.
No, no,
you
hold-
challenged me to a cage match,
No, no,
acting
no,
like a
sir.
12-year-old schoolyard bully.
Excuse
Sir,
me,
hold on.
hold it. No, excuse me, I have the
I
mic.
will say exactly.
Senator
what you
Mullen,
said.
I have the mic. You have questions on any economic issues, anything that said, go for it. We're not here to talk about physical abuse.
You brought.
We're not
him
talking
in.
about, of course I
And,
did.
and let me tell,
He's-
let me show you his hearing, because I want to expose this thug to who he is. And
If you don't point at me, that's disrespectful.
I don't care about respecting you at all. I
don't
respect people that
respect you at all.
respect. So
All right, hold it.
let me.
Hold it. No,
You're one of
no,
a
hold
hundred
it.
of the most
Hold
elite
it,
people.
please.
Act it.
Please. All right? This is excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
This is a hearing to discuss economic issues. All right? If you have questions for Mr. O'Brien or anybody else on what he has said, go for it.
I mean-
But we're not here to talk about fights or anything else.
I'm quoting exactly what he said.
You can
and
say
this
what
is-
you want,
This is
but-
your witness
This
you
is
brought.
my
And let me,
witness.
I'm exposing him.
You can
as a
talk
person
anything you
who he
want,
is. So
but
in
no fight-
2013,
Nope.
in 2013, O'Brien was suspended by the Teamsters for intimidating your own members. In 2014, you were part of, what would you say, organizing the harassment and intimidation of the Top Shelf crew.
Chef, not chef.
Top Chef, okay. And then, and I think in the reports they said sexual, racist and homophobic slurs and death threats. 14 tires were sliced, and 5 Teamsters were arrested. And you said, well, I had nothing to do with it. But however, in that same statement, you said, but if I get called to testify, I'll plead the fifth. This is a witness you brought in here. In 2017, you were removed as lead negotiator by then President Hoffa for UPS for your actions. And then in 22, when this guy was elected, what he said after he got elected was he wanted to bring the mob mentality back to the Teamsters. This is your guy.
And you're obviously going to give him a chance to respond to your questions.
Absolutely, absolutely, because this is my question. Because you called me out. I didn't call you out.
Yeah, you did.
You said anytime, any place.
That's,
what you said.
let's get the record
Okay.
straight.
Ms. Hold it, no.
Hold on.
Senator Mullen, do you have a question for the witness?
Yeah, I
Okay,
think that's what
let's
I'm getting
hear it.
So, anytime, any place.
No, that's not,
April is a charity event.
no, that's
for-
not, no.
No, it's a, he,
No, we-
sir, he said it, and this is my
He is
time,
here to
and you
te-
didn't set
no.
parameters on what the questions can or cannot be asked, and I'll ask.
No,
you
you're not going to,
questions.
we're not going to be talking about
yes, we
physical
did.
confrontation.
Oh, this is about charity, for a union charity, because this
This
is for firefighters and.
Do you have a
policemen.
question on his
April,
testimony?
April.
Grow up,
April
will you
next
please?
Do you have
grow
a
up. You're an
question
embarrassment.
on his, let's not
You
be.
said it.
You're an
You
embarrassment.
said
You're
it,
an
and I'm just
embarrassment.
simply answering it.
You
Senator
reached
Mullen,
out
go
to
hold it,
everybody.
hold it.
I-
Senator Mullen, you made some charges.
Charges?
Mr. O'Brien, do you want to respond to
Yeah,
the
go ahead,
question?
please.
Yeah, I mean, look, the reality of it is, you know,
Accept my challenge, tough
Mr.
guy.
Mullen, tough guy.
Answer, hold it, answer the questions.
All right, you're one, he
Please.
made a lot of statements, right? And his statements are fiction at best.
Fiction, I read them.
Can you, answer-
What?
answer the question, please?
I can't understand him, to be honest with you. He rambles so much. What was your question, actually?
Well, you said I made a lot of statements.
No, but what's your question? I don't understand your question. Could you repeat it?
You said anytime, any place.
What's your question?
Accept the challenge.
What challenge?
You said anytime, any place. I'm accepting yours, so why don't you come
What
back?
challenge? What challenge are you talking
April
about?
30th. How about we do it for a charity at the Smoking Guns in Tulsa, Oklahoma?
We're not going to be
what was the
talking about
challenge?
physical
What are you talking about?
confrontations here.
You want to fight me?
What'd you say about anytime, any place?
Let's have coffee, discuss our differences.
Oh, that's what you said.
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
All right, well, let's sit down and have coffee.
Let's
I'd
do
love
it.
to.
I'd love to.
But
do it.
It's
the,
funny how you're backing out.
okay.
I don't back on anything.
You did.
You're the one. You're a 100.
Senator-
Should be the most influential people in this country, making changes.
Senator
You're
Hassan-
focused on.
Okay,
Why-
You're
thank
focused
you.
on
Why did you-
debate
Thank
that's
you.
not even
Fine.
relevant.
Keep texting
You're an
me and they
embarrassment.
got
Senator,
silent.
You're an
excuse me.
embarrassment.
They
Well,
went
That's what you
silence
are.
after
You're an
after
embarrassment to
my
the
text.
state of
This
Oklahoma.
hearing is about the condition of the working class in America.
You
That's
brought a
what we're
thug
talking.
into this
You're the biggest thug here.
You brought him in.
All right,
You're the biggest thug. Even your
I don't know
colleagues call you
Why
a
you do
joke.
what you're doing, Senator Hassan?
Thank you very much, Mr.
Senator
Chair.
Hassan, you got a
Senator
question?
Mullen, please yield. I've been recognized
No,
by the chair.
you got it.
Act accordingly.
now-
Microphone is yours.
Chairman Sanders, I want to thank you for this hearing. I want to thank Ranking Member Cassidy, too, for participating in it. And I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today. It's really a great time to be able to be with all of you and to be here with union leaders to discuss the important role that unions play in improving the lives of working families in New Hampshire and all across the country. I have 3 questions. I'd like to get through all 3. I want to start with you, Mr. Fain. You talked in your opening remarks about the historic gains that the United Auto Workers have recently achieved. And I understand, and you mentioned that soon after the agreements were announced, other automakers have boosted their employees' hourly wages and benefits. So can you just talk a little bit, and try to keep it to 30 seconds to a minute, about how union successes lead to improved conditions for all workers?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think this goes back to, Mr. Mullen's previous comment about, talking, I think he was, I respectfully had to disagree with his comment about that, in right-to-work states, workers make more money. And I think this is a prime example. We bargained our greatest contract in our history, the richest contract in our history, where it will change lives. And, we set that standard. And immediately you saw Toyota, Honda, and now Hyundai changing their conditions, raising pay for their workers and shortening the progression to get to full pay from 8 years to 4 years, from 6 years to 3 years. And we did the same thing from 8 years to 3 years. So obviously, that is a direct result of the impact of what we bargained for. And I think it even goes a step further. I think, during the COVID pandemic, I think people had to really reflect on what's important in life. Yeah. And it's not working 7 days a week, 12 and 16 hours a day, working multiple jobs. People want some semblance of a life, and they shouldn't have to work that much to make a living. Right. That's what we should focus on in this country. And I think people see that, and people want to be a part of that.
Right. People should be able to know what their hours are, work hard during those hours, but then go to their kids' Little League games and take care of their elderly parents and shovel their neighbor's walk, right?
Work-life balance issue. That's what we talk a lot about now, yes.
Thank you very much. Mr. O'Brien, worker safety should be a priority for all businesses, yet unions still have to fight for basic worker protections. Our country saw some of the hottest temperatures ever recorded this summer. Many cities experienced extended periods well over 100 degrees. This puts employees working outdoors at serious health risk if temperature-controlled areas or adequate break times aren't provided. However, during this same period, the Teamsters had to fight to secure air conditioning in delivery trucks during their negotiations with UPS. Mr. O'Brien, beyond the health and safety implications, how does lack of access to basic protections impact worker morale and worker productivity?
Well, I think it's the best example is what's happening at Amazon right now. You have a company that has the most OSHA violations that have to deal with egress issues over heat conditions where people are passing out, some are dying on the jobs. And that's the beauty of having a collective bargaining agreement that we have with UPS. There are mandates and plans in place to put air conditioning in the vehicles, make sure that the buildings that they're working in, the warehouses, are properly ventilated, make certain that we have safety committees that are part of the collective bargaining agreement that mandate and monitor. And UPS is a fine example where we have the least amount of OSHA reportable accidents because we do have those checks and balances in place that protect our workers.
Right.
It's not just a union versus non-union issue. Right. We think that we set the standard in this last agreement where we think every employer should adopt the policies and procedures that we were able to negotiate in this industry.
Right, and it improves worker morale. They know that they'll be safe in the workplace and that their health will be considered.
Well, I think if you go to a workplace that you know is going to protect you and be safe, then you know that you can have a long-term career there where, your employer actually does care about you.
Right. One more question for you, Mr. Fain. Investments in workers and their families pay off for businesses. Businesses that provide paid family and medical leave, for instance, are able to better attract people to the workforce and reduce turnover, which saves them time and money. Mr. Fain, some paid leave benefits were included in the contracts that your union recently negotiated. How will workers' access to guaranteed paid leave impact the stability and success of the companies that they work for?
Well, we made we caught a lot of flack, a lot of laughed at, mocked, for some of the demands we put on the table, the 32-hour work week being one of them. And all this gets back to is having work-life balance. And, the paid leave was a big issue, in the birth of a child or adoption or certain situations like that. People need time to adjust to that. And that's something we don't talk about a lot publicly now, but these are all work-life balance issues, to me, it goes back to mental health issues also.
Yeah.
When people are working themselves to death 7 days a week, when they're working multiple jobs, scraping to get by paycheck to paycheck, this affects the mental health of our society, and I think that's why we see such an increase. So we have an obligation to give people adequate time to do those things. I mean, when you have a child, it's one of the greatest moments. I have two daughters. I mean, literally, when both my daughters were born, I cried for a half hour. I mean, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And, you know, I had to take vacation to spend time, but, you know, so I think it's a great benefit, and management does that. Management already had that benefit. It was just basically giving our workers a right that the managers are playing so enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Braun?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've had these discussions before. I come from the world of full competition, transparency, the things that classic markets are made of, an engaged consumer. And in so many instances, that's not the case anymore. You've got huge mega corporations, many of them multinationals. And we've had this discussion. I know Mr. O'Brien and I have had that. That is where you've got to have some counterweight. You've got to have a voice for employees. And when I hear stories of a CEO in a public company making 100 times the wage of the average employee, yeah, and thumbs went up to even more, I'm going to say a figure much lower than that would not be the case in almost all small businesses. Any business that is being held in check by true markets. I come from a place where you're lucky to grow up in a community where you couldn't tell the difference between blue and white collar. Many of my employees were blue collar folks that ended up working their way up into management. But I've made this statement too. If you pay good wages and good benefits, you guys are probably not even needed, because employees would choose probably not to even go there. Where I want to go is when it comes to the small business owner, most of whom make a living out of that small business. To me, it's harder than just working for someone. It's in that same category, though. Your family is living off of it, and you got to have a living wage, or you have to have a return on that business. And when it comes to union efforts to maybe focus on the gig economy, small business, franchisees, which is where a lot of people get their start, almost none of them want any help. Do you feel, and I'd like to start with Mr. Fain, Mr. O'Brien, and Ms. Nelson, is your opinion that that is not the bailiwick of what you're interested in? Isn't there plenty to do where you have that disproportionate difference between employee and huge public companies that have a different characteristic from what I'm describing? And does that mean you should lay off of that area and focus on where the need is most? Mr. Fain, would you start?
Thank you, Senator Braun. I think, when you talk about, competition, I understand, competition to me is a code for a race to the bottom. It always has been, because we seem to find the lowest bidder. But in what you're talking about with pay and benefits, I understand, how that's being framed. But there's one thing that you didn't talk about, and that to me is why unions are really imperative, and that's a voice. It gets lost in the shuffle a lot of times. But when you're an employee at will, you can be fired for any reason or no reason at all. That can't happen with a union. And so, you can have an opinion, you can have a grievance, and you can raise those grievances.
But do you think that's applicable at the level of small business in places that are there scrapping at the lower end of the economy, where they want that autonomy, and where, in my observation, they generally are paying their employees more than they're making anyway? I'm not disputing, I'm acknowledging that there's a place against super mega corporations. But then I look at the PRO Act, which has got features where it looks like it tries to get into an area where I don't think there's a need. Give a brief response to that, and then I want to hear the other two.
Small businesses, I don't know, I take, my daughter is a dental hygienist. I mean, and I've seen one dental firm she worked for that kept cutting their wages, cutting their pay, and they have no repercussions. They can either quit and go somewhere else or just deal with it. And, so I do believe that there are things that apply in small business as much as it does larger corporations. Naturally, larger corporations have, very different circumstances, and, but I think, people still need those protections. People work for dignity, and every job deserves to have dignity with it.
Before I run out of time, Mr. O'Brien.
Yes, so I just want to give you a brief history. I came out of rank and file small business, and we negotiate with big corporations nationwide on behalf of 1.3 million members, and we negotiate on small white paper, small businesses. And, to your point, there is a difference between both. The one goal that we always look to achieve is to negotiate a contract, especially on the small business side of the smaller employers, that's obviously sustainable for them, but also rewarding for our members. So when you are going into these negotiations, and I come out of a family-owned business where I worked for a great family that were just as hungry to be successful as we were, and they worked just as hard, those are the people we don't want to hurt. Those are the people we want to try and help, and we have helped, and we continue to help.
Thank you for that distinction. Ms. Nelson.
Yes, thank you so much for the question, because, of course, we do need to put the check on this massive chasm between those who are in the corporate class and those who are in the working class. But in those situations, what the PRO Act is trying to do is to make sure that every single person in this country has the right to join a union. In many of these small businesses, sometimes, the reasons that people are choosing to unionize has to do with sexual harassment, safety in the workplace. So having that voice, like President Fain said, is critically important. And where people are running a good business and they have that dialogue with their employees already, that may not be happening. But the right for anyone to join a union and create that in the workplace and actually create a better situation for those employers who may not be getting those issues to their desk. They may not be hearing about the issues of sexual harassment and bullying in the workplace. But through the union, there is that protection to bring that forward, deal with those issues, and oftentimes resolve that and keep that out of litigation, which is going to be helpful to those businesses too. So I just give you one other reason why it can be very advantageous.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Smith.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you, and I really appreciated what you just said, Ms. Nelson. I think that really captures a lot of what's happening here. Last month I went to Hudson, Wisconsin, the home of Senator Baldwin, to walk the picket line with Local 722. Of the United Auto Workers while they were on strike. About half of those workers in Hudson are from Minnesota. And, I won't forget, I talked to one of your members, Mr. Fain, who told me as he was there how worried he was that the big three CEOs were just going to wait him out, just hunker down and wait him out. But then he said, it's scary, but sometimes you have to stand up for what you believe in, for what you know is right, and it is not right that these companies are making billions of dollars in profit while the people whose labor is producing that profit can't even afford to buy one of the cars that they make. And so it seems to me that what hurts our economy is the concentrations of power and wealth that means that only a handful of people are doing well while regular middle-class people are struggling to pay for childcare and maybe buy a house or take a vacation, which is, something that everybody wants to do. So for me, these fights are about taking on this imbalance in power that exists in our economy. And so my question to all three of you is, why do you think that your members and your unions were ready to take on this fight right now? Why is this the moment? For years, Americans have been dealing with this imbalance of power and struggling, watching the rich get richer while everybody else is just trying to figure out how to hold it together. Why do you think this has been the moment?
Thank you. It's a great question. And that's one thing I want to, I guess, elaborate more deeply on. Contrary to the thug label that some people like to put on us, I want to be clear about this. We want businesses to succeed.
Right.
It does us no good to kill a business. That doesn't do our members any good. It doesn't do anything for jobs. We want business to succeed. But we're not going to let it succeed at the expense of the workers. And that's the problem globally and in this country, is there is such a giant chasm between rich and working class now, and it's got to change. So, I think our members, everything we've done resonated well with them this time, just from the fact that not just UAW members, not just union members, working class people in this country, in this world, are fed up. Mm-hmm. They're fed up with falling further and further behind, scraping to get by, and the dollar not going anywhere as far as it used to go. and conditions just keep getting worse. So I think, we ran a contract campaign to get our members engaged on the issues and to make sure everyone understood what the battle was. And we were very transparent with our communication throughout this process, something our leadership hasn't done in the past. We gave weekly updates to the membership, and not just the membership, the whole world.
It seems to me you were really building a strong collaboration with your members. This wasn't
Yes.
this was not a top-down kind of a thing.
Yes.
It was a grassroots.
It's a member-driven,
Right.
the one thing we wanted to change when I took over as president was I want this to be a member-driven union, not a top-down oligarchy where I just bark orders and
Right.
expect people to follow. The members run this union now, and that's how a union should be.
Would Mr. O'Brien or Ms. Nelson like to, you're in a slightly different place, Ms. Nelson, but why do you think this moment is sort of the moment that is galvanizing this organizing and this change?
Well, I think, speaking for the Teamsters Union, we represent 1.3 million members that are airline pilots to zookeepers and everything in between. So we have a very diverse membership. And the one thing that I think has promoted organizing and promoted a thirst to be represented is during the pandemic, the majority of my members were all deemed essential workers. They were providing goods and services to this country, whether it was delivering parcels, whether it was making sure that food was distributed out of warehouses and delivered by trucks, making sure rubbish was picked up, making sure that
They were making
hospitals
sure everything held
hospitals
together.
are clean. So I think, in light of all the essential services our members provided, the one thing that was clear with all CEOs and with corporations were they were thriving during the pandemic. Their bottom line and their balance sheet kept expanding and expanding and expanding. And I think our members, obviously not naive to the fact on how much these corporations are making,
They could see it.
wanted to be rewarded for their hard work, rewarded for putting their lives in jeopardy. Some lost their lives, putting their families in jeopardy, sacrificing time at home to make sure that we provide a supply chain and essential goods and services country. So I think that's one of the reasons why there's such an appetite and thirst to take a piece of that pie, so to speak.
Ms. Nelson, really quickly, before Chair Sanders gavels us both, why do you think this is the moment for flight attendants and the people that you represent?
Yeah. Flight attendants often are at the tip of the spear of anything happening socially or politically in this country. And what we saw was people coming onto our planes before the pandemic and walking through first class, where the bigger seats are, and then walking to the next set of economy seats that are maybe have more room. And as they get further and further back, their knees are up at their chin. And there's no room for their bag. You might be lucky if you get to sit your rear end in the plane. So we saw that the entire American public was really experiencing this very shared experience across industries about the way that the productivity had been moved to Wall Street, that more and more of people's time was being taken from them, that they can't make ends meet, that they can't travel to their place of work. And then the pandemic came, and what they saw was that workers on the front lines were not only seen as a line item, they were seen as disposable.
Right.
And this next generation hears that Social Security is going to be taken away from them, any sort of protections are going to be taken away from them, we're not making good on our promises. People are understanding that that the only way that they can fight back, the only way that they can fight for the American dream is to join together in unions and take that power and take it right to where the decision makers are, which is at the corporations who are controlling our politics because money is controlling our politics now. That's why we are where we are.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Hickaluba.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member. I appreciate the hearing, the opportunity to hear both sides of the argument. And I want to say, Ms. Nelson, in case I don't get back to you, when I was governor, I think one of the reasons we were successful, I hired a woman named Ellen Gollenbeck, who came in as my Secretary of Labor, and she had been a flight attendant and organized flight attendants, and her impact on the other leadership of our state was profound. In other words, she had a different way of resolving differences, and I have utmost respect for Mr. O'Brien and Mr. Fain, but I do think that sometimes having more women in organized labor is beneficial.
We de-escalate and we lead. We don't challenge to cage matches. That's exactly right.
Now. Mr. Fain, let me start with you. The Economic Policy Institute found that as union membership has declined, there's been a corresponding rise in income inequality. And since the announcement of UAW's tentative agreement with the big three, Toyota, Hyundai, Hyundai, and others have subsequently announced wage increases for their workers. Union advocates have always, of course, advocate for their members, but that has been made a couple times already today, that this is a benefit that non-unionized workforces receive as well. So in addition to the wage increases, what are some of the other benefits that you expect to see for non-unionized workers following the recent tentative agreement? Did I make myself clear?
Well, I mean, wage increases are one thing, but I mean, obviously, there's a lot of things we bargained for. I mean, health and safety standards. You look at with the EV industry alone, there are chemicals that, aren't regulated yet that we know we're still working on. And, when you have a union involved in that, there's a means for, we have safety committees that actually work on those things. So safety is always a big issue. Work-life balance issues, just as we talked about paid leave for employees, with the birth or adoption of a child. I mean, there's several things we could go on and on about, but, it really comes down to, I think, when you look at the wage bump right away, what we call the UAW bump, I mean, I think that's just predominantly, people go to work to try to sustain a living, and so I think we focus a lot on the wages, and I think it gets a lot of focus. I think that's the immediate concern of these three companies, Toyota, Honda, and Hyundai right away, was to raise wages because it's the quickest thing that is visible that will hopefully, in their opinion, discourage members from wanting to become part of a union, but.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more, and I think that bump is profound for so many people's lives, and we've heard about that from a number of different speakers. The electrification and that transition to a decarbonized transportation economy, this is a global trend, and we've had witnesses speak on these hearings before that talk about once people drive an electric vehicle, they don't want to go back, and this is going to be driven by consumers. Now, issues around cost certainly are relevant. In any new transition to a new economy, usually there are price differentials that we try to smooth over. As we transition to electric vehicles, unions are importantly negotiating deals that help balance the emerging technologies with job retention. In other words, obviously there's going to be some efficiencies here. Your tentative agreement included new commitments to ensure existing manufacturing plant workers can transition into the electric workforce. Can you talk a little bit about how you approached negotiating that tentative deal? Balancing the EV goals. And the climate change is real. I'm not sure that we've had too many witnesses here that don't believe it's a real issue. So figuring out how to get to a decarbonized economy is going to be critical. How did you look at protecting the workers' rights as we make that transition?
Yeah, I mean, our main concern going into this was the fact that we knew.
Help you out, that big guy.
Sorry. Yeah, our main concern going into this was we knew that this was on the horizon and it was coming fast, so naturally, we talked about it a lot, a just transition. No matter how this goes, no matter what the timing is on it, we want to make sure, just in the UAW alone, in the big three, 20% of the workforce is in powertrain work, which is making engines, transmissions that drive the vehicles. If that work does, taper off, naturally, and batteries take that place, and drive motors and things like that, we want to get a big piece of that so that there is a transition where workers aren't left behind. So we bargained for language, to give our members flow rights into those jobs in the event that that's happening. And, and that's how it has to, to me, that's what a just transition is. It's not leaving people behind, but also new people that hire into those plants that they won't work for poverty wages, which was the case in Altium in Lordstown, Ohio, when I was elected president. And we've changed that now.
I couldn't agree more, and I think that's going to be a big challenge for everybody, for both sides of every issue, for Republicans and Democrats, to figure out as we do go through this great transition, which is real, and most of us think it has to happen. Yeah. How do we do that in such a way that the friction, the turbulence, the loss is minimized for the people that do the work?
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you. I got to go preside, so I yield back the floor. Sorry to run off.
Senator Markey.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. Thank you, President Fain, for your work increasing the benefits for UAW workers at Ford, GM, and Stellantis, and I'm sure that there's going to be a bouquet for you from the Honda and Toyota workers as well. Thank you, Mr. O'Brien, for your work increasing the benefits for UPS workers. Thank you, Ms. Nelson, for your work in making sure that airline workers got the protections they needed in the pandemic, and thank you for trying to organize the Delta flight attendants right now. Thank you, because the benefits will flow throughout our society. So these are big fights, big wins. Unions are taking big swings at corporate greed and disgusting union busting that cripple our working class. My father, who was a union vice president, always said you can't beg for your rights, you've got to take them. That's what you're doing. Workers across the country, from warehouses to schoolhouses and hospital hallways to the halls of Congress, are organizing, unionizing, and striking. They are demanding better and taking back their rights. But the fights are far from over as corporate greed runs rampant. We in Congress can't rest until these wins reach every worker in our country. So right now, Mr. O'Brien, Amazon forces workers to use scanners and devices to track their every move, every box lifted, every delivery completed, every restroom break taken is accounted for by an algorithm and artificial intelligence. If these workers don't meet corporate quotas, they risk losing their jobs. Faced with the choice of feeding their family or breaking their own back to meet these quotas, some workers end up with life-altering injuries. In short, smart tech turns sinister when big corporations use it to turn warehouses into Big Brother. So what do we need to do, Mr. O'Brien?
Well, I think-
to break this this trend that Amazon is leading?
Well, I think we take a look at what we achieved during the UPS agreement, because we do the same exact work. And look, I apologize for not acquiescing to the cage fight in November. I was in a April. I was in a
Don't
cage.
worry about cage fight.
I'm going to tell you, I was in a cage fight with UPS, one of the largest corporations, so I really couldn't entertain you at that point. But what we did was we negotiated strict protections, and we know that the parcel delivery business is and look, guilty as charged. We hit that send button on our computer, we want our packages 2 days prior, right? And there's standards that are put in these companies, that productivity standards that are not attainable. And what we're able to do at UPS, protect against such unattainable productivity standards, make sure we protect the members, but more importantly, provide a quality of workforce that is going to be sustainable. And we did that through protections in our collective bargaining agreement. At Amazon, you're 100% correct. Those workers at Amazon are held hostage by technology. They're held hostage and held to a higher standard that's not achievable. And when the company decides you're no longer worth it, they just throw you out and recycle someone new in there. That is why there's a 150% turnover ratio. That is why they have the most injuries per OSHA, and that is why they need to be organized and protected under a collective bargaining agreement.
Ms. Nelson, the theme of today's hearing is a rising tide lifts all boats, but we could say a rising tide lifts all planes as well. Earlier this year, I reintroduced my Good Jobs for Good Airplanes bill, which would provide airport service workers, baggage handlers, wheelchair attendants, airport restaurant workers with a living wage. These workers play an essential role in making our aviation system run smoothly by paying airport service workers, and the SEIU is trying to organize them, fair wages and benefits. We reduce turnover, retain experienced staff, and make our entire aviation system safer. Can you speak to how the flight attendants and the CWA's work unionizing and representing flight attendants benefits all workers to keep our aviation system working?
Senator Markey, you and I go back a long time, and it was just after 9/11 when you came directly to the crisis room and grieved with us and said that you would stick with us to make sure that aviation was secure. And we did several things together, 100% screening of cargo. You also were instrumental in making sure that the airport screeners who were going to the lowest bidder working for the airlines at that time. I remember these people. We saw them all hours of the day. They had to be there all hours of the day to provide for their families. And when we federalized that workforce and when Congress changed to the pay and benefits of that federalized workforce this year, year to put that on the general schedule so that we can attract security workers to those jobs, then TSA was actually able to attract people, were able to maintain that security. That same formula needs to be put in place for all of the workers at the airport. Every single person, from the concession workers to the people who push the wheelchairs, we cannot take those planes off the ground if people are not getting fed properly. We have more people getting angry on the planes. We have medical emergencies on the plane if they can't get the food. We need to be able to take care of our disability community and make sure that aviation is open to everyone. When you have workers who can't make a living wage and are actually sleeping in the gate areas because they are working around the clock, shifts around the clock, and sometimes different jobs at that airport, that makes all of us less safe. They also cannot live near those airports because they are usually in major metropolitan areas and they're having to take transportation, sometimes 3 hours back and forth, so they don't even have time to go home between those shifts. So we've got to raise the standard for all of the workers. It's about safety, it's about security, and it's about basic dignity at work. We support you 100%. Thank you for always sticking with us, and we're with you.
My time is up, but I was also going to compliment you, Mr. Fain, for working to organize the electric vehicle battery plants in our country. We have to make the transition to those being union workers all across the country. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Senator
Mr.
Markey.
Chairman.
All right, we're going to wrap it up. Senator Mullen wants to say a few words, then I'll say a few words.
Well, I'm going to leave the last statement for Mr. O'Brien completely alone and move on past it. If you do want to really have that cup of coffee, reach out. We'll sit down and talk about it. Now, my differences with Mr. O'Brien has nothing to do with unions. Zero. I have no problem with unions. I have problems with unions forcing people to join unions, but there's a place for them. And those that choose to join the union, join it.
What is that?
I have no issues with that. Mr. Finn,
What is it?
I enjoyed your behavior and honestly your comments. Ms. Nelson, I enjoyed the fight, really do. And I want to make it very clear, for people that want to join the union, that's fine. I believe in right to work states, and let the employer and the employee make the best decision what's best for their company. And that's it. At the end of the day, no company survives without employees. And no employees are hired without the company. It takes both in the same boat, rowing the same direction to be successful. I'm only moderately successful because I was fortunate enough to have great employees that worked for me for a long time, and I was able to build a company with them. At the same time, they were actually able to live a very successful life too. So appreciate the time, Mr. Chairman, appreciate the witnesses that came in. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Lujan just walked in. Senator Lujan?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. It's good to see you. I'm going to catch my breath real quick. I apologize for just running up this way. First off, Ms. Nelson, I want to say thank you for raising Al in your testimony, who is a retired police officer from New Mexico, who the country lost, who his family lost on September 11th on Flight 175. I want to thank you for not just keeping his memory alive, but everyone else who we lost that day. Thank you. Now, Mr. Chairman, I'm the proud son of an iron worker. My mom retired after 33 years from local public schools. My brother's IBEW. My grandfather, my mom's dad, was a union carpenter. So the turmoil that we saw, Mr. Chairman, was usually around holidays, and it was whether iron workers or carpenters were stronger. My brother was of a younger generation, so he didn't get to insert himself into that specific conversation. I had a roof over my head because people looked out for each other, because they got to stick by each other. And, you know, the family would often remark that they wish unions weren't needed. Think about why they came together. Decades ago, people not getting treated fairly, people getting taken advantage of. And whether it was decades ago or it was this morning, I've learned there's power in numbers. If you lean on each other, if you count on each other, you can usually get through something. And it's the same thing where if a neighbor of mine has a challenge or there's a hole in the roof or something, than every one of us that has a tool or the capability or a pair of hands or one hand or two, whatever it may be, that can get there and repair that. We do it together as a family, but you lean on each other, you help each other in good times and in bad. And my dad often reminded me when he also picketed outside of Los Alamos National Laboratory with his local because he was concerned of unfair working conditions. Now, the irony of all of that, Mr. Chairman, is my dad died from lung cancer because of exposure on the job. Because decades ago, they didn't have the technology necessary to give a damn about keeping people alive or what they were breathing in every day. Because they made a few extra bucks by not having the respiratory equipment that was needed. So they just let people get sick and die of cancer. Unions came together and said, that's not right. And they started fighting for more safety gear, more safety apparatus, so that when someone worked a full shift, whether it was a morning shift, an afternoon shift, swing, or graveyard, they could get back to their family home that night and maybe on Sunday go to services together or catch a ball game together or maybe a barbecue if they were able to. Thank you for what you do. Because heaven knows the laws that Congress passed aren't strong enough to keep people alive and keep people safe, because the laws that Congress passes create loopholes that allow folks, once it gets to a rulemaking, to create all the darn loopholes that exist so that people like my dad can't be here today, and he had a lot of living left in him. A lot of living left in him. I miss my dad every day. I still argue with him on occasion when I'm out in the field and I'm working on his old 1972 Ford, because I can't get it to work the way that he did. But by the end of it, once it gets started, I apologize and I ask for his forgiveness, and he sends it down because the tractor keeps running. It doesn't shut down on me. That's the relationship I had with my dad. Now, Mr. Chairman, I have many questions here surrounding the concerns that I saw with inequities with pay and what's happened to working families across the country. I'm going to submit these into the record and ask for these to be addressed. I'm sorry that I got emotional today. Dad must be on the brain. Dad is always in my heart. But just thank you all for being here, and hope that we can find a way forward to make sure that families are able to get to work, but also get to their families at the end of their shift. I yield back.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Lujan, for expressing not only about your family, I think, for millions of families in this country. And I want to thank all of the panelists. I wish we had. Thank all of you. Look, what we are dealing with today, and Senator Lujan made this point, and others have made the point, is some people have extraordinary wealth and extraordinary power. And the people on top have never, ever done better in the history of America. More income, wealth, and equality than we've ever had, more concentration of ownership. And what we've heard today is what's happening to ordinary people. How are they doing economically? Well, many cases, fallen further behind, can't afford rent, can't afford food. Corporate profits are soaring. Can't afford to send their kids to childcare. So how do we deal with that issue when so few have so much power and so many are powerless? And the answer is what I think we have heard today. The only way anybody has ever made success is when people come together. You can't do it alone. No worker is going to take on General Motors or Stellantis alone. Not going to take on UPS, not going to take on United Airlines. People have got to stand together. And when people stand together, they succeed. And we're seeing that now, and I think we're going to see more of that in the years to come. So I want to thank all of our panelists, but obviously for me, I want to thank our union leaders and workers all over this country who are demanding justice, not only for themselves and their unions, but for everybody. With that, this is the end of the hearing. For any senators who wish to ask additional questions, questions for the record will be due in 10 business days on November 29th. I ask unanimous consent to enter the record any statement from stakeholder groups, and the committee stands adjourned.